All right, folks, welcome back to Inside the Numbers, Thursday, April 8th, right? April 8th. Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. Follow me at People's_Pundit on Twitter. And as usual, I'm joined by Tim, the Source Anderson. Follow him at TJ Anderson1 on Twitter. Big morning, a lot of news, big show. We're going to really have to watch the time here. We're going to talk about Iowa. As promised, Iowa and Ohio. We're going to look into those voter files. We're going to run a voter analysis and check out what we see there. I think you guys are going to be stunned if you watched the show yesterday on Wisconsin and Wisconsin surprised you, what we found there. I think you're going to be stunned when we take a look in Iowa and Ohio. But right now, we have to start out, Tim, with the economic news. We can't ignore this. So unemployment claims we have this morning. We have big news from the Fed. Why don't we just start with a market update, and then we'll get into the unemployment claim news, the number for insured unemployment, because, this is a show. People's Pundit Daily is a website, a data journalism website, and anything that is a record is news. So this is a data show, and anything that is a record is news. So we have quite a few today that I want to get into. But let's start off first with the market update, folks. Tim, we're up big this morning. Tell everybody what's going on and why.
Okay, so we had gains of basically 10 to 12% over the last 3 days. Typically today, going into a 3-day weekend, you expect maybe to see a little profit taking from traders, and even just from some people that bought some stocks thinking they were buying them for the long term. They said, okay, all of a sudden, Jesus, this thing's up like 7 or 8%. Maybe I'll sell a little bit. But this morning, the Fed came out with yet another bazooka from its toolbox, basically extending its long-term lending facility for small businesses, cities, states, counties, and as a result of that, stock index futures about a half an hour into trading. Stock indexes are up a little over 2%. The Dow's up 500 points. The S&P is trading right around the 2,800 level, up a little over 2%. We're basically looking at 2 to 2.25% gains for most of the averages. The Russell 2000 is up 4.5%, trading above the 1,200 level. And some of the Fed action specifically is beneficiary to small cap stocks, not to be confused with the small business lending program that the Treasury initiated last Friday.
So basically let's talk a little bit about the Fed, because the Fed took what some said were premature actions. I think now hindsight's always 2020. I mean, now we have significant challenges ahead of us, looking at the report out today, which we'll get into. But there was a lot of talk about the Fed basically being out of ammunition. So the Fed is moving here. They're doing what they can. What do you think? What is the signal from the Fed? What do you think? Because we were talking a little bit about this before the show went on, before we went live here. What do you think what is the word from out of the Fed? What are they trying to say?
The Fed is basically taking a page out of Mario Draghi's playbook from 2013, when he said he would do whatever it takes to support the EU and the euro currency. That's when sovereign debt along the southern strip of the Eurozone was Italy, Spain, Portugal. Debt in some of those countries were trading at 7%. And he initiated the buying sovereign debt program from the EU. Italy, obviously the most significant. Very few people realize this. Italy is the third largest issuer on the planet of sovereign debt, behind the US government and Japan. I know that's striking to imagine, but Italy is the third largest issuer of sovereign debt behind the US and Japan. Their rates subsequently went down to 1% to 2%. But really, we're talking about the Fed today. And they did a number of things. 95 times out of 100, I wouldn't get into details of what the Fed is doing because I just think it's too much in the weeds.
It's in the weeds, yeah.
But basically, they are doubling up on what they call their term asset-backed lending facility. They're extending facility, any AAA existing mortgage-backed securities. They're going to be backing up newly issued collateralized loan obligations. They are also creating a $500 billion lending program to states, counties with more than a population of 2 million, and cities with more than a population of 1 million.
Well, let's get into the good stuff. Let's start this little debate because we're gonna have this debate. Let's get into this news. Let me pull this up, and the unclaimed, initial, which is important to remember. We tried to explain this a little bit yesterday. Initial jobless claims, not just weekly. Initial jobless claim number that came out this morning at 8:30. Okay, I want to pull this up for everybody. There's our chart. When this crisis kicked off, and when the government, state and federal governments, local governments started taking mitigation efforts, basically, in a nutshell, there were this chart was a pie chart, but I mean, it was a combination chart. But the main were spleens, which are lines, like smoothed out line charts, and when you clicked on it, you could get some readings from the pie. Basically, this has been such a dramatic change that we've had to change this chart to show. Let me show you the 1 year. And this is why we had to change it. We had to change this to a column. And what this shows are the initial number for the lagging week, the 4-week average, and then also the insured unemployment as well as its 4-week average, Tim. If you go back, and I know if we look at everything, it's very hard to tell. You can see recession in shaded gray areas here. Basically, we have seen numbers at these levels, Tim, like first of all, we've never seen the levels with initial jobless claims, where now we surpassed that weeks ago. But what we're seeing is if you look at prior recessions, you will not find a comparable period. And just to give everybody the quick breeze over here, 6.6 million, another 6.6 million added. If the consensus, this is why we always give you guys a forecast range. That's what I'm highlighting here. The low end of this range was 3 million. The high was just under 8 million. And the consensus forecast for the week for initial jobless claims for the week was 5 million. Okay. And when people ask us these questions, how quick can the economy recover? We do our own numbers over here. We were hoping for a little bit less than this consensus. And there's a reason why, just from where these jobs are coming from. And Tim and I are going to get into a little bit of a debate over this. This number for me was bad. And it was worse than the consensus expected, but it was worse than what I was hoping for. And the actual number is 6,606,000 for the week ending April 9th. And again, this is my point. And before we get into it, we have never seen anything like this here, folks. We had to change the graph type to be able to show you how historically unheard of these numbers are. And I am making the case here. Where's my little thing here that I brought? If the president has got to start moving here. I know, and I'm hearing news that I liked him, so I don't want to just be Mr. Nancy negative here, but I am hearing things that I like, out of the White House. But these numbers are getting bad, and we're getting to a point where the quick bounce backs that we're all hoping for, and we've been talking about, and the questions have been coming in. How long will it take? We're getting, in my opinion, and Tim differs. So let's have this debate. But Tim differs. I believe if the president, this report is a warning, is a siren, and we need to start refocusing our efforts here. The revisions to these models we talked about yesterday. We are now below a bad flu season 68,000 roughly in 2018 was the count for a bad flu season. We could talk about mitigation efforts, but I've been through this a million times. These are not, though that graph may try to, plot statistics, but these are people, Tim, and some of these people, their jobs are not going to just come back if we continue down this course. It is time to wake up and smell the coffee. I know you have a different take on this, but small businesses cannot take this prolonged period of shutdown. They just to think you could just turn this on and off. And by the way, my point is, before I let you argue, we like playing devil's advocate over here, right? Before I let you have your say and you make your case, it's not going to just be like the president comes out today and says, okay, we're going to turn it on, let's go. That's not how this is going to work. And you will have, unfortunately, in this hyperpartisan era, we're going to have governors, Democratic governors, who are going to resist the president trying to get the economy going. It's not going to be like Trump's going to flip a switch and that's going to be it. That's going to be it. He's going to have to, this is going to be weeks of preparation and phasing out mitigation efforts. And then there's going to be, mark my words, there will be periods, weeks, whatever, of political battles, of Trump having to threaten these governors to stop hurting their economies. It's not going to be like a switch is on, we're good. That's not the way it's going to happen. So go ahead. Let you give your take on this and why you disagree.
Well, I think that, when you say that that businesses aren't going to be able to just get back to work, what when you say they can't take this much of a shutdown, how much of a shutdown are you talking about? 6 weeks?
Well,
if
Larry Kudlow
if you fast forward to April 30th, we will have been shut down for 6 weeks.
There will be business. I could tell you just from going out actually and talking to people yesterday, there will be restaurants that will not make it that long. And by the way, one of the top comments was something along the lines of, we will never make it that long, but we may if we had an actual date, a firm date, but they don't have one. So that makes it even more difficult. They can't even go to their bank and say, hey, things will start turning around for us by April 30th because we're not getting a firm date. I know the president, has his own, this is the time that they extended these guidelines, but they're not giving businesses firm dates on this. But it doesn't matter anyway, because if we do not start to phase in, I'm talking about like now, if we don't start to phase in certain people, then they're going to be gone. They're just not going to make it. They can't. There are a lot of small businesses, and I mean not the SBA definition of a small business. I'm talking about your community definition of a small business that employ maybe 3 to 5 people, and they cannot pay the rent for more than a month or two without this going on. Not all of them are getting this money. They're certainly not getting it right away. When the money finally does come, another bill is going to be due. This is the way, this is the way it's going. This is the reality for a number of these people. And if you go in and look at the report, I really can't wait until we get the revisions to the jobs report we just got, because that will break it down by industry and sector a lot better. But look in the states in this report, which is starting to, that's what concerned me more this morning than anything else when I looked at it, more than even the number, where it's coming from areas we wouldn't think are hit. But the fact of the matter is, what's going on is that the shutdown in other parts of the country are hurting supply chains in areas of the country that aren't hit hard by COVID. And now that is causing layoffs. So this is the stuff that just can't be turned on and off. And by the way, the downplaying the historic nature of these numbers is something I have a hard time understanding. I mean, I just showed the chart. We have never seen spikes like this before. So, to just like willy-nilly, now I know you're not, but there are others who are doing that, who are just willy-nilly dismissing it. Oh, they're all going to come back. They're not all going to come back, and they're not all going to come back right away. That's for sure. And we're hearing Larry Kudlow yesterday, Tim, He said, 4 to 8 weeks. 8 weeks, never. It won't make it. It won't make it.
I guess my point is all the employees are backstopped by the federal government right now. And if these small businesses, if they, if they're capable of filling out paperwork, if they do their own paperwork, if they do their own bills, if they do their own taxes, they can certainly fill out the whatever form is required by the Small Business Administration on the small business loan program, and go to their local bank or whoever they have a banking or a financial relationship with, whether it be a bank, a credit union, or a savings and loan institution. And if they don't do any of that, and if they have a service that does their that does their taxes, does their bills, does all their paperwork, they might have to spend $50 or $100 to have that service fill out the paperwork. It's not that complicated.
Oh, but
if they want to survive, if they really want to survive that badly, they need to fill out the paperwork and go through the process. If they don't really want to survive, and if they want to have an excuse for being put out of business, they've got a perfect excuse for it.
I don't know that that's true though, Tim. I mean, one of the restaurant owners yesterday, they first, and this is a good point that she made, only payroll is 100% forgiven. And then there are little formulas, where
that's right. Of the total amount, 25% can be for items outside of payroll. Okay?
And then only up to a certain percentage can be forgiven. I believe it's 25% of non-payroll expenses.
Exactly.
So for people who operate off of such small profit margins, such as like a food service industry, business,
the restaurant business,
not feasible.
The restaurant business is a brutal business. It always has been. There are restaurants. If restaurants survive in New York City for more than 3 years, it's the exception, not the rule. And I get it. I get it that some restaurants are not going to come back. It's unfortunate. You know what? I would think that a lot of those physical plants that have a lot of restaurant equipment in place are close to being turnkey enough operations that other people will open them up. I can think of half a dozen locations with that near where I live, where restaurants have closed, and I already see that they've been in the process of opening up as of a month ago under a different name. It happens all the time.
I was just going to say that is true.
Look, 17 million people have filed first-time unemployment claims in the last 3 weeks. Do I expect that 17 million people are going to be added back onto the payroll in the month of June or in the month of May? No. Right. No. But I would say that by the end of the second quarter, you will have 80% of those people working again, and the rest of those people will still be backstopped because all of the initiatives from the federal government, the supplemental unemployment insurance, is guaranteed through the end of July.
Right, the end of July. But and then also that's one industry though I'm talking about here.
Right.
You look at energy. Energy is another one. If you look, we did a couple, I was like 2 months ago. I don't know if you remember, we talked about it, but it was a very in-depth comparison of the Trump versus Obama economy. And we put up a map, state by state, territory by territory. What was the GDP numbers under Barack Obama, quarterly GDP, and then what were the GDP numbers under Donald Trump? And the point of this, I think it was like, anybody could see the results of the study, which is that energy was a main driver of increased GDP under Donald Trump, which trickled to wages. I mean, it had such a magnifying impact. West Virginia at that time was the leader of the nation in GDP growth, which is incredible because it was dying under Barack Obama. Right. Pennsylvania was another one that we highlighted. I mean, all of it was there for people to look at. But we highlighted Pennsylvania because 1, it's a battleground state. 2, it's an energy state. And 3, I think that it played a major role in Trump being elected to begin with. So I thought it was worthy of highlighting. The difference in the GDP numbers, where it was almost not everything could be attributed to energy, but a very, a significant degree. And then we had impacts that are basically what you call secondary jobs that are created because of that. It's not, if you open a pipeline in a certain town that was a either dying town or, something that was a smaller population, and they have to bring workers in there.
Right.
Then there are other, services that have to be provided to those workers, medical care, grocery stores, whatever it may be. Those are, impact jobs, basically. And so that is obviously included in those numbers as well. But it's clear that and then Texas, which was already a booming economy, was loving the Trump economy, the change to a more goods producing, energy focused economy, as opposed to what Obama had, which is a low paying, part-time service sector economy. That's why he had such a historically weak turnaround. And because that was the driver of the Trump economy, which made it better than the Obama economy, that is why it's so dangerous to have this prolonged shutdown. And I will concede, because I know you're going to bring this up, I will concede that the collapse in the price of oil most definitely, it is on the table as to why some of these companies are just going to go bankrupt. They're just going to, and they'll be bought off and pieced apart by bigger companies, which stinks.
Well, we had a big wave of that in 2014, 2015.
Right. And
this is not the first time that we've dealt with oil prices taking a deep plunge into a level where it became unprofitable for a lot of higher cost oil producers and drillers to really struggle. Now, I think what's happened since then is that a lot of them have become a lot more efficient. A lot of their break evens are a lot lower than they were. Now, given oil oil below $30 is not a profitable for a lot of the new energy companies that have developed in the shale and the fracking businesses over the last 6 years or so. Okay. But if oil comes through and goes back into the high 30s, low 40s, that's still not ideal, but I think a lot of companies will be able to battle through that and survive.
Well,
we're a ways from that right now.
Yeah. I think at this point, though, I mean, it's not,
you've seen a lot of the big majors cut back on their CapEx spending plans for the remainder of this year and maybe into next year. I get it. Those stocks are so far off their highs that, the next thing you would possibly see would be dividend cuts from some of them. Still, the oil industry is not going to certainly completely go away.
Right, I'm just telling everybody real quick, just to give you a heads up and everybody a heads up. I see the comments. Go to YouTube. I know, look, everybody's home, so Periscope is laggy. If you find it laggy, go to YouTube, or Facebook Live was crisp and clear yesterday. It's just, unfortunately, with everybody home, there's the broadband's being hit, the internet's being hit. That's why I'm actually doing a little bit better over here, Tim, than, I know you, where you are. It's just not, the density is just not the same. So I'm not having the same issue. But yeah, I mean, I bet we're going to, we'll be back to this topic. Time will tell. But I just think we cannot ignore the historical nature of these numbers, how historically bad they are. We've now, with insured unemployment under Donald Trump, the rate, anyway, not the number of people, the rate had fallen to, and I'll go and peek, it fell to 1.1%. I know that. I'm just looking to see, the last time it was out 1.1%, which was a historic low, was November 16th, 2019. It does pop off that low once in a while, but it basically has hovered at 1.2% since April 28th, 2018. All right. Except for small little dips into, like I said, it never rose under Donald Trump. It would go, it is a clear downward trend, and it hung out at 1.2, Tim, for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. Again,
Right.
since April 28th, 2018, it has not gone above 1.2%. And the only time it came off that near historic low is when it hit the historic low at 1.1. It took all of 2 weeks for the seasonally adjusted insured unemployment rate to rise to 5.1%. And this is for the week ending March 28th. These lag as well. This series lags. So just this past week, when we first got that report, Tim, it was kind of resilient. And, it's not just the lagging nature of it, but it was so low that it took a lot to get it off those lows. And it was 2.1% in last week's report, which was for March 21st, the week ending March 21st. And then this week, though, we saw a dramatic increase. Not surprising given the number of these claims, but it rose 3%. It is now at 5.1%. And if this continues, Tim, then we're going to hit an all-time high here as well, because the advanced number for seasonally adjusted insured unemployment, the number of people, not the rate, for the week ending March 28th is now 7,455,000. That's an increase of almost 4.4 million from the previous week's revised level, and it is the highest ever on record. It surpassed the previous high was the Great Recession. And it is now the highest on record. And if you look at where these claims are coming from, Tim, this is what concerns me. These are states that just are not hit at all. New Hampshire, not at all, but nobody, you know what I'm saying. Low, relatively low. Ohio's in there, by the way, at 4.0%. We have to talk about the model missing in Ohio. The model misses in Ohio being off just incredible numbers. They were so wrong, considering they were the state, if you remember, who went on TV and told everybody that they probably had this many number of infected people, they were going to need this many beds. The idea, and this goes back to what we were talking about yesterday, and I got the break coming up here in a minute, but the idea that it was the shutdown and the social distancing that we can now attribute to all of those forecast misses is ridiculous. The date of the order, it was just a few. I mean, it was just a week ago, a little over a week ago. The model missed way before that order was even issued. And of course, we had seen that it took some time for Americans are going to do what they want to do. That's another thing with these stay-at-home orders. This is a total different debate, Tim, but that's another thing with these stay-home orders. As Americans are Americans, and Trump's right. The country is not built to be frozen like this, and people don't like these kinds of orders. They just don't naturally. There's going to be large numbers of people who are just not going to abide by them. I mean, and in a pandemic situation, that's really all it takes to be able to move the disease from one place to another. So again, we'll have to see when we'll know when time comes. But that's another area of disagreement. And that's why it's great having Tim on, man. We can disagree about this stuff. Instead, I'm concerned there's an echo chamber out there. That's not going to be like that on this show. There's an echo chamber of people. It's like, well, your partisan affiliation determines how you think about these things. It's unbelievable. I mean, when did we lose the ability to critically think? I just, and challenge consensus and assumptions, especially during times of crisis. That's the most important time to do it. But here we are, 10:28. Let's take an early break because I'm looking at this. Maybe twist. Maybe it's just where you come from. Maybe it's just where people are. But some people are telling me, that Periscope is great. It's fine, for them. And some people are telling me it's not. Tim, is Periscope a shared server? I imagine they are, of course, right?
I have no idea. I'm not that familiar with it. The only thing that I would say, if people are having issues with their Wi-Fi cutting out from time to time, I have had that on occasion. And what I do when I do this show now, I haven't had an issue yet, 30 minutes into it. I take my tablet off Wi-Fi and just let it stream 4G. I realize some people don't have maybe the luxury to do that depending on what their location is. And I take my phone off Wi-Fi. Now I'm plugged into a Chromebook right now to get my video feed with you. And so I only have one device rather than three sucking off my Wi-Fi server in the other room. And I noticed when I did that the other day, I had no intermittent glitches during the 2 hours. And yesterday I had one. And then after that one, I shut the phone off again from Wi-Fi and shut the tablet off. And I was fine for the next hour and a half.
Okay. So there you go,
So,
guys. I mean, that's everybody's.
it's just one thing you might try if you have the luxury of having a strong 4G signal. You might not want to do it all day long because you probably don't want to stream 4G all day long on your other devices.
Right.
But if you happen to be watching something on Periscope or YouTube through your Wi-Fi server, you might see if there's other devices that are hooked up that you're not using that intensely right then, that you can you can take the Wi-Fi off for a brief period of time.
There you go, guys. There's at least some advice, right? I was wondering why I couldn't hear myself. I didn't have the thing feeding back. But anyway, and somebody was talking about, the connection to Periscope, and I'm thinking something on our end. But no, it was just that I'm an idiot and didn't plug the thing in correctly. All right, so it's 10:31. Indulge me here for a second, folks. I love you too, Breewee, but text show. Okay, I'll talk to you later, little princess. Anyway, so here we go. 10:31. Let's do our quick word, and then I'm going to ask Tim real quick before we get into the second topic to go over those markets, because if Tim, we could hold these for 3 days, that would be nice, especially given. And then maybe you can talk to people a little bit about whether or not these jobless claims really are taking away from that Fed announcement. And then before we move on, I do want to just show people the chart on the number of insured unemployment. It's just crazy. I mean, we just haven't seen a spike like this. I'm going to have to zoom in to the 1 year to give because it's when you go out. I think we have this series data going back to 1967. So while unemployment claims go even farther than that, but the rate itself goes back to 1967. And if you look at all of those years, it doesn't really show. It doesn't give you a good perspective. You have to zoom in on like a 10-year or 5-year and include other periods of recession, maybe a 20-year span. We'll take a look at it. But again, it is 10:32. You're watching Inside the Numbers. If you are on Periscope and it's a pain, try it on YouTube. But if you're on it and it's good, hit those hearts, follow us, whichever one you're looking at, whether it's on PPD or on mine. I know it streams on all of that stuff matters. Give us those hearts. We love them. We love you guys back too. And then if you're watching on YouTube, give us the likes, subscribe to the channel, to the PPD channel. Building it from the ground up, YouTube, all this matters. But if you really want to support the show, go to People's Pundit Daily and subscribe. You can get there by the short link, ppdnews.us/subscribe. And that is the best way to support us, with the exception of those likes and those hearts, because they matter. ppdnews.us/subscribe. And follow Tim on Twitter at TJAnderson1. And if Tim looks familiar to you guys, it's because he's everywhere. He's on Fox Business. He's on CNN. He's on CNBC. Tim is on the floor when we're not in a shutdown, and gets in, he's in front of the camera a lot. So this is really a treat to have him here all the time. I imagine when we go back, we'll have, to the grind, things will be a little bit different, but you'll actually see Tim on the floor, which is neat. So moving on here. So why don't you give a quick market update, Tim? And then I'm curious, I haven't looked at it. I mean, I can check on it while you're talking, but are the markets just ignoring these numbers? Are they baked in at this point? I mean, we're going to have to, you would think we would give up some of these gains if it wasn't for the Fed decision. But
I just think the market's not ignoring these numbers. That the Fed announcement actually was masterfully timed to come after the first time unemployment claims were released at 8:30. So the market's really responding to the Fed announcement. I think the market knew that we're in a period of very high unemployment claims right now. We might have been anticipating somewhere in the range of 4 to 5 million unemployment number for this week. or for last week, it came in at over 6 million. So obviously, when you're talking numbers of that large in the unprecedented scenario we have going on with battling the virus, it's very hard to get a really good estimate on what the numbers are going to be. But just to give people an example of what the markets have done from the lows that really took place from the stretch of like March 18 to March 23, coming into today, the Dow had rallied 26% off the March 23 low. The S&P had rallied 23%. The NASDAQ had rallied 18%. That's a little bit less of a rally, but keep in mind, the NASDAQ had a smaller decline from the highs from mid-February. The Russell 2000 had rallied 20%. And the Dow Jones Transportation Average, obviously very beaten up from airlines and railroad stocks, had even rallied 20%. So right now we're holding on to close to 2% gains for the Dow and the S&P. It's a very volatile day. We started out with about 2% gains. We gave up half of them, and now we're back to 2% gains. And I would just it'll be very interesting to see how the market reacts going into the last 2 or 3 hours of the day, given that we're heading into a 3-day weekend. I think we will have potentially some profit taking from people that were fortunate enough to add to their long positions earlier in the week. But also, I think if there are short sellers out there, they're just going to realize that the Fed is just not going to quit on this. And they are going to continue to unleash everything in their toolbox until they feel that the economy is going to be supported through what is really completely just a manufactured recession conditions from the shutdown in response to the coronavirus. So
can you talk a little bit about, and I'll have to speak a little bit closer into the mic here apparently, but can you talk a little bit about oil today? Because we did have some news last night. It's pretty vague, but give us a little bit about what's going on with oil prices. That ties right into what I was talking about before, whether or not these smaller energy producers can sustain this very long.
Sure. I think oil prices are going to be all over the lot for a little bit. Now, Earl, I believe that the OPEC plus virtual meeting is going on right now. So we could get headlines at any point in time on what production cuts they have agreed to. There was a story late yesterday coming out of Russia that Russia was going to agree to production cuts of 1.5 million barrels a day. That would be maybe 13%. Brent crude was trading this morning, even like 45 minutes ago at about $34. That was up from maybe $27, $28 late last week.
And that's the benchmark for people who don't know. Brent is the benchmark, and then
that's the Middle Eastern oil,
and then WTI.
And a lot of times, if they show NYMEX oil or West Texas crude, that is what we get domestically. That's quite a bit lower. It's trading maybe about 26, 27. Look, production cuts will help, but obviously there's very little demand for oil right now, with much of the world on some type of economic shutdown. And oil is just being stored everywhere it can possibly be stored. I'm sure there are very large oil tankers just floating around the globe right now that are loaded up with oil, just waiting to dock and be unloaded. But even the refineries and that have temporary storage facilities are loaded to the gills. So what we really need to do is, when we come out of this shutdown, unload as much of this oil that's being stored all over the place as possible, and when people start, driving normally again, and the airplanes get back in the air, et cetera, then we'll be working off some of this oversupply.
All right, let's take a look at that chart that I was talking about before for the number of insured unemployment. Okay, let's take a look at this chart, and then we'll move on to the voter analysis because we have 2 states today. So it'll take me a little bit of time. Plus, I really want to. And we'll have the market breaks in between. We'll talk economy in between. On the during the breaks. But yeah, I really want to show them, Tim, the geography of this. Because we're talking, I mean, this all really ties in today. We're talking about the damage to certain sectors here. And when we're looking at how voters feel in this country, a national poll, not that I'd tell people to ignore them, but that is not what decides the presidential election in this country. We're decided by the Electoral College. And in those states, there are going to be certain groups of voters who are going to make or break this election. It's actually kind of amazing how big of a country we are, but how a subset of people have become so important in the country for elections, and it's by design. That is what it is. Gives fuel to the fire for people who don't support the system. But that's a whole other show. There's another debate to have. Let's take a look at this chart because, again, I got to show you guys how incredibly you can see how steep it is right here, right? And I was trying to show on a larger scale, Tim, but it just wouldn't work. So I just went back to the article. Again, you can find all these stories, and I'll put them into the YouTube too for you guys to look at if you want to go through the charts on People's Pundit Daily. Every indicator we cover, almost every single one, if the data is available, we will plot it for you historically to give people. It's all about context, especially when it comes to data journalism. It's about context. All right. So the rate itself, we talked about the number. Okay. That is at an all-time high. But as you can clearly see here, we have had periods where the rate has been higher. All right. We got 3 decimals out in this chart. 2 decimals. But we've had these 2 periods back here all the way back in 1975. And then we've had this is a pretty solid recession here too, Tim, before the Reagan boom. That was up there. A lot of people don't remember, but Ronald Reagan was not looking so good for re-election in 1982. His approval rating was terrible. The economy really hadn't kicked in a high gear yet. But here we go. So 5.3. And then back to the Great Recession, 4.9, around 5%. Okay. Here, and you can barely see it because the spike is just starting, but this is the March. It's actually a little bit lower. This will actually go higher when I zoom in here on the 1 year. You have to actually zoom in to get the data set to do what you need it to do, but we're now at 5.1%. So I really wanted everyone to see that and put it in historical context. Remember, this is at 5.1. When you zoom out here, for those of you who do go on and play with these, it will not show you at the end. So, because the way that the styles and the data is generated for these charts, it doesn't actually show you the true number because it's not widened out. You have to zoom into the 1 year. And then when you zoom out and you look at other periods like May of 1975, that's when it really starts to get real, right? So, and this was not a good time. This was the beginning of a good time. The positive spin on this, folks, is that I could be, and I'm not even making the case that, Tim and I are arguing, but Tim is just more positive about how long this shutdown can go before we bounce back than I am. But I do believe it is not only possible, it's likely and will happen that we will bounce back. For me, it's a matter of time, and it's a matter of suffering that the economy causes people when this happens. I obviously, looking at this, we've been in worse situations with the actual rate before, though the number of people with greater population, right, Tim? I mean, we got to factor population into this. We certainly have more workers than 1975, right?
Oh, unquestionably.
So this stuff has to be taken into context, but I do want to show this to you so you understand that this is uncharted territory, okay?
And when you talk about 1975, I mean, 1970 and 1974 was probably the deepest recession we have had since the Great Depression. And I would argue that the recession in 1974 was much more severe than the recession that we suffered after the global financial crisis. It wasn't as much as a concentrated hit to the financial system, but it was an extreme recession that really was sparked by a very large, what was at the time a very large spike in oil prices. Gas went from basically 20 cents a gallon to $1 a gallon, and it was the first really oil embargo from OPEC.
Right. So,
and we were also in a horrific political environment where President Nixon resigned in August of 1974, the first week of August 1974. The market did not bottom out until October of 1974. And just to put it in perspective, the Dow, now it was 45 years ago, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is almost at 24,000 right now, bottomed out in October of 1974 below 600. 600.
Right. Before, because I don't want to muddle the waters here. Before we get on to the next topic, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to put this up. If you guys, ask questions and I want to answer them, let's pop them on the screen. So I hope, nobody minds, but this is a really good question, Tim. I'll let you take this. I think I spoke a lot about this already as far as what I think, but he goes into something totally different. This is something you've actually have talked about before, in conversations that we've had. So this question is from Mark. All right. Mark Johnson. He says, post-pandemic, what industries do you see changing? For instance, I can see higher education changing, where people could select online classes from several different institutions in the same semester.
I think that that's a possibility. You could certainly see more online education. I think that you could potentially see a surge in, just to stay on that same theme, you could see an increase in homeschooling, which has attracted a number of people, but seems to have maybe peaked out in the 5 to 6% range. Clearly, that would get significant pushback from teachers' union groups, which are very powerful. But I just think that if you've got homeschooling going on through the remainder of this school year, you're going to have some people say, you know what, we could do this. And you might have little communities. You might have communities where not people individually homeschool. Clearly, if both parents are working, it's not feasible. But maybe if somebody down the block is hosting, 8 to 12 to 15 kids with a little homeschooling program, that you may see that start to gain some traction around the country. And I think that, you're probably going to have a faster move into avenues of working from home that has been a little bit of a trickle coming into this. And you may have just, a little bit more of an uptick into that going forward.
And also, we don't think about this, but how it could impact the medical industry itself. So before everything went into complete and total lockdown, I don't know how many people went to go see their own doctor, what have you, but they had already started to do what we now all know to be social distancing. Certain people were, just let in. It used to be a free for all. Everybody waited in the waiting room. We already saw changes in protocols before it became a national lockdown situation, which was, we'll have to see the impact of that. Will that be a longer term thing? Will it be something that we see seasonally? I guess that depends on the treatment for this virus, where we end up with it. And by the way, we're gonna do a show on treatments because there is some stuff we want to share with you guys, but especially when it comes to vaccinations and what some of these researchers have been finding with the coronavirus. But that is, it is an entire show. So almost, it could be, if we, it depends on how many companies and researchers we decided to talk about. But interesting stuff with that, and then how that would impact going forward. We'll just have to see.
So, Rich, I'm getting headlines right now that the White House is announcing an economic coronavirus task force, probably to be led by Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Larry Kudlow. I think this is the first step of what I've been talking about for a while.
Amen.
Your big concern about the supply chains being like broken and taking a long time to get them back online. You're going to have the right people here giving really definitive input that, look, if you're talking about starting to open things up back on May 1st, we need to get these supply lines back tuned up before then and get stuff into the pipeline to major population areas so that when people get back online, they have they have services and the goods to go back to life, to go on the first stage of getting life back to normal, to the extent that they need it.
Amen. That's all I can say about that. And we did know that this was in the works now for a while. He had been, not debating. He had been considering this, and now he's done it, and that's great news. And that's all I've been saying for a while. We just simply, I would have liked, but he has the right people in charge of it, though, Tim, which is a key thing here. Like we talked about the other day during the I think it was maybe Tuesday, when we said, who would lead this thing, and I think that is right along the lines of what we were talking about, we were hoping for. So this is a good thing. This is a very good thing. There has to be a point where, at some point, it has to shift the focus here from the medical to, because now we are at such a smaller, way smaller projections for not just for total deaths, but across the board when it comes to the projected number of ventilators, the projected number of hospitalizations, and how many beds you would need. We are now below a severe flu season. So this has to be the focus now. There is not an argument to make against, the case I'm making is not just a case about economics. It's not. And if there are, severe recessions and depressions, that is a matter of life and death too. And we have, this is come to the point now where we have to start to pivot. And I'm glad to see that. And that's only ever been my only point, really.
Right. So just to get back into the question that you were addressing earlier, that came about how businesses and industries might be affected. I think the biggest hurdle for a lot of people is going to be getting comfortable to going back to the sporting arena that holds 50,000 people, getting comfortable to going into a restaurant that has the same seating arrangements that they had a year ago, where, there's 120 seat capacity at that restaurant, and maybe some people also sitting or standing at the bar. And for a lot of food establishments, if they were to decrease their capacity, that would significantly affect whether or not they were profitable. If you took a restaurant that was used to seating 120 people in 3 stages during the evening on a busy Friday or Saturday night, and they cut that down to maybe 80, they might not be profitable doing that, or they might have to raise their prices.
Yeah, that's
significantly.
I
so
actually meant
I
to
think
bring
you
that
might
up
get that
before.
for a couple of weeks, then you would have to go back to where, people were just a little bit more comfortable with. I think people will kind of feel their way around it. I think first of all, there'll be so many people there's so much bent up. I got to get out of my apartment. I got to get out of my house. So you'll get a big surge of people going to places. You'll still get the people that'll be like, I'm not really comfortable going into a crowded scene yet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it will also be somewhat geographic based on what people are hearing about in their local communities about, how many new cases have we had in the last couple of weeks? What do I hear from people that I know in the medical arena, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And religion too. I mean, not just the economy, but activity, religion as well.
Right.
How long will it be before we're more comfortable to go sit and in
And I think you'll see these states like Virginia that put on a shutdown basically until June 10th or 11th, and Maryland that did it indefinitely. You'll see those people scale that back as soon as they realize that they're way off the norm. And that the general public of their states is like, you got to be kidding me here.
They killed school for the school year in some of these states. I mean, it's over. And so, this is,
well, you know what? That could be actually a very positive development, because that could get a lot of people to say, you know what? Maybe we could do this homeschooling thing.
Right. And Laura's back.
Even if it goes from 5 to 10 or 12%, that's a big increase.
Right now, I don't know how it is in other areas for people. I'm in Florida. How it is for my children now? They have Google Classrooms, and it's technically optional where I am, but it's not optional in my household. All right. They have to do it. If they don't do it, they have to face consequences because I'm gone when some of their Google Classrooms go on. But in any event, they go and they are getting packets that are for a week, 2 weeks, whatever it may be. And it's packets of work, reading, math, basically everything. Then they have Google Classrooms where they can ask the teacher a question on something that they may not know or understand. But at the same time, before Laura went back to doing what she was doing in the community, she's feeding kids during the day. Before she went back to doing that, she was the head of the Barris Institute for learning. And we had talked to some people, and it was an idea, although it would have broken social distancing rules, but it was an idea that she had such a good, strict regimen, including science and, staying apart, but going outside and integrating outdoors with their lessons. It was really neat. I mean, that was at least a positive development, but parents have to work. So not all parents can do this, and inevitably she had to go back to doing what she was doing as well. All right. So it is 10:57. I have a lot in Iowa alone that I want to do. So because there were so many counties, Tim, in Iowa that flipped from Barack Obama to Donald Trump, counties, looking at the map for Mitt Romney and John McCain, you would never have thought a Republican presidential candidate could have won. I mean, it's just nobody who thought he would do this. It doesn't matter how white they are.
There's no doubt about it, because even George W. Bush had maybe won once, lost once, very, very tight in Iowa. And then during the Obama elections, you thought, boy, we don't know if that state's really even coming back or not. But but Trump won that handily. And I think, look, it's your expertise, but it certainly seems like he's on the path to win that handily again.
We would say now, even though he had a mild, like I said, rally around the flag effect, he really did. We would still say that he's probably, judging by other polls nationally, the ABC Washington Post poll was taken at that high point. So now there are other polls that show Biden doing better. Still, at his low point, Selzer is a great pollster, and Selzer is, I'm not, like I told people the other day, I'm not going to get into the habit of really slamming and criticizing pollsters here. I will tell you a pollster I think is not a good pollster and is doing things wrong. I'm not going to, personally attack them or whatnot. But if I think somebody's doing something iffy or ignoring obvious necessities that they need to change their model, and they're not. And I think there's something fishy about it. I'll say it, but I'm not going to get into the business of attacking pollsters, But I will say when a pollster is a good pollster, and Ann is a great pollster, and she just polled Iowa recently, and even at his not so great point, Tim, he's way ahead of Biden. Way ahead. He's actually got a stronger lead against Biden in Iowa than he did against Hillary Clinton. And we're talking about small statistical differences, but I'm going to show you guys why when we come back. I'm going to do the spiel, and then I'm going to show you for 30-second spiel. I'll give it to Tim to do the market update, and then we're going to get right into Iowa, and I'll show you why. And we're going to go through a few counties here. And Tim brought up George W. Bush because I want to give you guys those comparisons to show you just how, like you said, they thought, oh, this isn't coming back. This state is never coming back, right? Because it looked hopeless, because it's not a traditional Republican constituency. As rural as it is, as religious as it is, as white as it is, there is a lot of progressive roots in that state. But because Donald Trump is a populist right president, he was able to tap into that constituency that loved Barack Obama. And if you think there weren't people who loved Barack Obama but voted for Donald Trump, I'm going to show you you're wrong. There are a lot of them, counties and counties of them. But let's get into it. 11:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. You can follow me at Peoples_Pundit on Twitter, and follow Tim. I'm joined by Tim Anderson. Tim the Source Anderson. Bet is dying to get back to Wall Street by now, but you can follow him on Twitter at TJAnderson1. At TJAnderson1. If you guys are watching on Periscope, give us the hearts, follow whichever one you're following. It's running on mine. It's running on PPD's. Follow one, follow both. All of that matters. Those metrics matter to us, guys. And on YouTube, if you're on YouTube and you're watching, which I hear from your comments is super crisp, then like us, give us a like, subscribe. And the ultimate way to support the show is by subscribing to PPD, the sponsor, which is ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. So we're going to do that market update, and then for a couple of minutes. And when we come back, we're going to get into Iowa. And then because I'm going to use the whole hour, I guess, for this, we'll bob in and out. We can even talk about economics with this, because it's the point of talking about these states today. Okay. If you caught the first hour of the show, the industries that we think are impacted from the shutdown and why that matters come November. All right. So go ahead, Tim, tell us what's going on with the markets.
So I'm just going to start with with a headline that says Saudi Arabia and Russia have agreed to deep production cuts. I don't have the exact details of it yet. I'm sure it will be out very shortly. Oil is up about 5%. I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see some selling into the market and or into oil, kind of a buy on the anticipation or buy on the rumor, sell on the news type of an effect. The Dow is though holding they're holding most of their gains. Averages are up about 1.5%. They've been up between 1% and 2% most of the day. I would certainly say that any green numbers today by the end of the day are a big win for the market, given the 10 to 12% rally that we had over the prior 3 days. There will certainly be a point at which people say, okay, look, we get it. The Fed's, opening up, taking out the big bazooka, and we're talking about, some better numbers on the virus, but still, we've gotten a lot. We've rallied very strongly off the March lows, and maybe we need a little bit of a pause here in this rally. Look, that's probably a conversation that'll go on over the weekend and in the next week. But I do think that to me, it's just I'm more and more convinced as time goes on that the March lows from March 18 to March 23 are going to hold. We might retest them. Almost everybody expects a retest. It's possible that retest has already happened, and that any sell-off we get in the market over the next couple of months will just be a much higher low than what we had in the third week of March.
And that's great. And 3 days, I would have been happy this week, Tim, if we had 2 days of these rallies and we held most of those gains on the week. Now we're seeing, I would not have expected Thursday. If you would have told me on Monday, that we were going to have a, not a rally even, but, holding most of the weekly gains because of these jobless numbers, I probably would have been skeptical,
Right.
So this is
I just think
good.
everybody views those numbers as history and as expected. I'm going to try this just one time and see if it works. Rich, just put me
Sure.
on the full screen just for a second.
Sure, I'm going to pop the map up, guys. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to pop the map up, and let's
I just want
take
to
a look
show you. I
inside
just
the
want to
voter
show you the
file.
S&P chart real quick.
Oh,
or I can do it in the next half hour.
Here, no, let's do it. Let's
So
do
just
it now.
put me on the full. Let me see if it works. I don't know if it's going to work or not.
Yeah, can you see it? Let's see.
Is there too much glare in
Oh,
there? Hold on a
no,
second.
you can see it, Tim. You can see it good. And I can actually hook you in there if you want to show people that in the
do that a little
future.
bit better later. It's
Yeah,
not
that's
really
good.
working like I thought it might. But if you can
still see it.
that, this is this was the low in March. This is where we are right now. This was the high back in February. So you can see we've gotten back a lot.
Let me, you know what I could do too? Here, let me show people on PPD. I just pulled up the S&P on PPD. Okay. Let's show them that, and then I can give them the full screen there, and then they'll really see it. But
yeah, if
you can see it there.
if you could zoom in that from on a month on a shorter term basis.
Yeah, I'm trying to get in a little. What do you want? 1 year, 3 months?
You can see where
Look
that.
at the 3 month. Yep.
Yeah, go to a 6 month for a second. That's not going to have.
There we go.
So you can see where everybody's talking about retesting the lows. We had that little sell off from the first spike up. I just think those lows are in. We're
off the Ackman lows, Tim
We've
says.
had 2 days this week where up volume was 90% of total volume. That historically is a very powerful indicator.
Lisa, we'll hit Pennsylvania. Just to answer you, Lisa, we'll hit Pennsylvania soon. I'm going to go from Iowa, Ohio to Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and then into Minnesota. We'll get there. But go ahead, Tim. I didn't want to.
So anyways, I just thought that chart was worth looking at just because, look, I think this has been a big week for the market. A lot of people are going to have to be rethinking. A lot of people who have been very, very convinced that we're going to make lower lows, I think they're going to have to rethink that a lot over the long weekend.
Right. And what we're going to see, we're going to see come Tuesday, we'll probably know a lot more, right? So, or even Monday, we'll see. But okay, so let's get into Iowa here. All right. And I can't see you guys, so just bear along with me. But let's go to Iowa first, and then I'm going to read you something that really is part of post 2016. I was out there on a limb, I was out there on a limb just to give everybody a little bit of backstory. So when we were polling these states, okay, it's very difficult when you are polling and you're showing the public what you have. It's very difficult when the entire world is saying something totally different than what you're coming up with, and you're wondering, am I doing something wrong, or is everybody else doing something wrong? And come election night, some of the stuff we're going to look at tonight, come election night, told me pretty early that I was going to be right, and basically weeping like a baby because I just thought, if I'm wrong, God, I'm going to be eating a lot of crow. It's just going to be bad. But these places we're going to look at today, you'll get an idea of what I'm looking at. when we get to election days. And what does Rich know when he's saying it's too early or it's over? Or whatever? This is the point of doing these segments. I want you guys to get that kind of insight. And then after 2016, I wrote about the Rust Belt Revolution that really gave Donald Trump the presidency. And Tim brought up George W. Bush in 2004 when we're talking about Iowa. His approval rating was 90% after 9/11, Tim, right? I think it's almost 90%. Talk about why I say that we're having a mild rally around the flag effect for Donald Trump. This is a mild effect compared to other historical crisis points. And yet, come 2004, come time for re-election against John Kerry, he won re-election by the skin of his teeth. He barely won it, and he won it because evangelical turnout in Iowa gave George W. Bush a 10,000 vote victory over John Kerry. All right, that's it. And that broke down to 49.9% for George W. Bush to 49.2% for John Kerry. Fast forward 4 years, and the economy's in the tank. We're having the global financial meltdown, and it's hurting everybody, including the farmers in Iowa, but the workers suffering. And Obama clobbers John McCain 54-44. It goes from being a slight Republican eke-out state to a 10-point trouncing for John McCain. In 2002, he did lose ground there. He got 52% of the vote as opposed to 54% in 2008. And Mitt Romney gained 2%. It was a 4-point total net swing, but it was still a 6-point loss for Mitt Romney, 52-46. Barack Obama, just for everyone to understand, while it looks like he won re-election handily, and he did, Mitt Romney never really had a chance during that election, contrary to what people said. He never had a chance. He still became the first president to win re-election with a smaller electoral vote margin and a smaller popular vote margin. So Mitt Romney cut into it, and I wouldn't even say it was Mitt. I wouldn't even attribute it to Mitt Romney. I would attribute it to Barack Obama being a highly polarizing figure, number one, and number two, his economy was not a traditional bounce back economy. The deeper the recession is the typical trend. Deeper the recession, the bigger the bounce back. Right? Would you agree with that?
And don't underestimate how bad of a candidate John McCain was for the point in time during in that election cycle. I mean, he very clearly said at one point in time, going into as the big issues with the global financial crisis were really percolating, well, the economy's never really been my strong suit.
And then on the flip side of that, Mitt Romney was widely viewed as a turnaround expert, right?
Right.
Or at least that was he was in the business world, and that is what they were trying to sell him as in Main Street America in places like Iowa. And given Obama's economic record was not the traditional norm, where there was not a big bounce back.
Right. And his issue was he was just a guy who was basically tone deaf, that just couldn't relate to Joe Sixpack.
I'll bet you $10,000 you're right.
And your average guy.
I bet you $10,000 Tim's right about that point. Do you remember that comment? Oh, that went over well in Iowa too. When Rick Perry, when they had the debate, the Republican presidential primary debate, and he turns to Rick Perry and he says, "I bet you $10,000."
Right.
If like $10,000 is
like it's nothing to me. I'll bet you $10,000 that I'm right.
That's like me and Tim betting $20, on something, right?
Right.
So this is where the Republican Party was in Iowa in pre-Donald Trump. And that's the whole point of me discussing this. In 2016, Donald Trump comes along, the billionaire working class, with a blue collar billionaire, whatever you got coined, and he demolishes Hillary Clinton in the Hawkeye state. So he beat her 51.2% to 41.7%. Now, this is why, let me start to run this stuff so you guys can see this, all right? So here's Iowa. Let's bring up the analysis report. Let's do what we always do, right? I mean, if you guys have been watching the show now, party, gender, household income, marital status, inferred ethnicity, education, religion. Those are the go-tos for us. So I'm going to run this model. All right. And here is the breakdown in the party. All right. This is like a little shocking to you guys. Why is it such a red state? Well, the nuns here, the independents, and go and look in Ann Salzer's poll, and you'll see that the independents favor typically. I mean, it's not just Donald Trump, although he's got larger margins among independents. She breaks it down by congressional districts, and that'll give you a good example of why you can widen it out to a 10. He leads Biden, Iowa right now by about 10 points. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit here, Tim. It's a little bit close for me. I don't know how it is for everybody else, what you guys see. But like we typically do, let me get out of here. Let's look at vote history, okay? Let's go to the propensity score. Let's do what we do before. They're at least 50% likely to vote in a general election. Let's update it again. And you're going to see, I mean, if you have a third of the electorate that is independent, unaffiliated, and they tend to back the Republican, you really need an increased turnout edge. One like they kind of got in 18. The independents did swing toward them in 18 as well. And then, of course, they had a much higher turnout. Their base turnout was higher. But again, we do that modeling, simple modeling, is machine learning, 50% likely. Have they voted? Will they vote? Can you count on them to vote? Is it at least 50% likely that those voters are going to go to the poll? And now we have a larger base advantage. So 41% almost for Republicans and 36% for Democrats. If Democrats go on to even lose those independents by a hair, Tim, 2-3 points, then we're talking about a big margin loss here. That's where you can widen it out. And if Trump winds up carrying them by 5 or 7 points in the state, then he's looking at a big win, 10, 11 points around where Ann Salzer has it. But here in 2000, and I'm going to go to geography because, like I told you before, if you think there isn't a Trump, a Obama Trump vote, all right, we're going to take a look at some of these specific counties. With the exception of Lynn, Johnson, and Scott counties, Trump flipped almost all of the eastern counties in this state. Scott County went for Obama by 14 points. It only went for Mrs. Clinton by about 1.5%. And 18 eastern counties flipped from Obama to backing Donald Trump. In the southern part of the state, Union and Clark counties, that they backed Obama by 4 and 1 respectively. They backed Trump over her by a 2-1 margin. So I actually want to take a look at the state in general, Tim, and then let's look at geography. Let's map this puppy out, okay? And look at geography. Let me pull up county. What was a good one right there that really shifted? 2-1 margin in Union. Let's go to Union. And then you'll see the impact of independence here, okay? Let's update it. And let's run it again, okay? We're just looking at Union County here. Look at that, Tim. Look at that. Yep. That is an area, and this is now you can go ahead and consider this a trend, all right? Because this is an area that went for Barack Obama by 4 points. 4 points. And Democrats are now a little bit more than a quarter of the vote. That's their base. That's their base can count on, go to vote. 25.7%, 7.3 if we go out to 2 decimal points. All right. And it's about still that sizable number of independents over there is 23.7, 23.67, right? So if you win that group of voters by a large margin, even 5 to 10 points, and your base advantage is already counting for half of the electorate, that's how you get from losing this county by 4 points to trouncing Hillary Clinton 2-1. And if you look in the more recent, I'm when it comes to Iowa specifically, and Tim knows this, when it comes to Iowa specifically, if there are competing data sets, meaning you go to Real Clear Politics every day and you look at polls. If you see Monmouth, for instance, with a poll and it says, maybe Trump's ahead by 2 points in Iowa, 3 points maybe, or maybe he's even down a point. I mean, don't be surprised if you see this stuff. And then there's Ann's poll there. Rest assured, Ann is right. Okay. I mean, unless you can show me another race in Iowa where Ann was wrong and somebody else was right, I will always go with Seltzer and Company's work over others. She just has this down to a science over there, Tim. And it's not just the general elections. Caucuses are very difficult to poll, especially since you have really 2 rounds of voting. You have the first and you have the second round of voting. And it's very difficult to know where someone's going to come down on that second round. And that's the importance of, well, who's your second choice? But if anyone who's actually been to a caucus would be able to know and figure out, it doesn't always work out that way. So it's a free for all. If somebody's not viable, maybe their second choice isn't even a legitimate second choice. So you can't just poll them based on that. It's very it's an art, polling an Iowa caucus, and until somebody can show me a different area, I'm telling you, if it was me, I would bank with Ann. So that's Union. Let's look at Clark. Another one of these counties where Obama won, but Donald Trump was able to not just beat Hillary Clinton, but beat her pretty badly. Make sure Union's still not on there. Yep. Okay. So add it up. Let's run this puppy again. And some of Iowa counties are small, so it's very difficult to get a larger sample size. But here we go. This is a little bit less, which is why you saw the difference in the margins for Obama between Obama and Trump. A little less here. We're only looking at about a sample set of 2,500 voters, a little over. So while that's big for a poll statewide, when I do these models, I like to make sure we have the biggest numbers we can. So this basically is telling us it's a slightly less base edge for Republicans. But again, how much would, just do the math in your head, folks, how much would a Democrat have to win independents by to even be competitive? A Republican could get trounced in this county, in Clark County, and among independents, and it still wouldn't be enough for them to flip that county. That's how badly Mitt Romney ran against Barack Obama, but it also is a testament to how different this electorate is now than it was back then. That's how much this state has changed. Now, the only difference, I will say this, Tim, while independents in Iowa do tend to lean to the right, they swing. And look at the damage that Democrats were able to do when Republicans, 1, did not go out to vote, and 2, lost an issue as badly as they lost that argument over healthcare in 2018. That is when you can even not just lose independents, but your core base voters could wind up staying home. Too much of them can wind up staying home. And then the, maybe 15 to 16% of moderate female Republican voters end up actually switching party because their top issue maybe for that year is healthcare, and you got trounced. I mean, it can happen. So, but I'm showing you these numbers because it's like akin to, what would a state be, Tim? A good state? Maybe New Mexico, where the advantage in some of these counties is already a base of 50% or nearing for 50%. And these are what are considered to be swing counties. Now, there are more in Iowa than there is in a state like New Mexico, but there are counties in New Mexico where Democrats begin with a base advantage like that. And those are counties that you would have to swing if you want to make them competitive. All right. So Tim, I'm not, speaking of New Mexico, this is a totally different state, but speaking of New Mexico, I'm not on that train yet. I'm just not on that train where his approval rating among Hispanics has gone up so much that he could wind up flipping a state like that. I mean, that would take a massive number, not just of independents, but a sizable number of Democrats who are registered, self-identified Democrats actually crossing over and voting for Donald Trump. It's a heavy, heavy, heavy lift. And, I'm not there yet. I'm really just not there yet. So I'm thinking of straight mapping this out is what I'm thinking of doing here. So if I pull these partisans back up, all right, let's add all of them and overlap them. I want to show you sometimes when we look at these numbers, let's do Republicans, let's do Democrats, and let's do other. Okay. And none. Let's just do them all. And we'll update it. Let's go to the map again. Micro-targeting, geospatial. Let's go to Iowa. Update the query. All right. And then what were some of the other ones that I added? What's a difficult map? So Scott. Let's look at Scott. There we go. Let's look at Scott County, because that is one that, some of these now wouldn't even be considered battlegrounds, Tim, but this one is a pretty good example. It's big, and it's a pretty good example of how different things are now. So this is, and the point, if you weren't watching yesterday, the point of this segment is why I don't think Iowa is particularly competitive. And I know what polling could say, but I just don't. Here we go. This is a county where Obama did very well. Okay. And then it backed Mrs. Clinton by a hair. Okay. But it went by Obama. It went for Obama by 14 points. And when Trump ran against Clinton, it only went for her by about 1.5 points. This is an area where Joe Biden would have to absolutely run the margin up like Obama did to squeeze out enough votes to undo the damage to the Democratic Party and the other counties such as the ones that I just showed you, like Union and Clark. They would have to make, I don't know, Tim. I mean, I would have to do it, but it depends what happens in the other counties. But 10 points or better here, folks, for a Democrat to win statewide. 10 points or better. Right now, they got about a 4-point advantage. So with almost 4 in 10 being independent voters, and independent voters currently, right now, according to the public polling, leaning to Trump, this is going to end up another 1 point for Biden. Maybe Biden by 1, maybe Biden by 3, depending on turnout. It's going to be a squeaker. And actually, Tim, in the Seltzer poll, Biden is actually running worse compared to Hillary Clinton among some of these voters. So, that it just goes to show. I mean, you got any thoughts on what you've seen so far, Tim? I mean,
he's been totally out of the spotlight. He's trying to do some virtual stuff from his house, but I mean, I just think that any drop off in Trump's approval right now will be just heavily overweighted by the fact that once the campaign gets into full swing and people take a really good look at Biden and listen to him try to speak listen to him try to deliver his message, and then listen to the things that he was saying about China just as recently as months ago, that he's just, I just can't see it.
Yeah, and specifically we're talking here about Iowa, right? So like I said, he's actually doing it. He would need a county like that to flip this state. That is where there are a lot of votes in that county for a state like Iowa. And I just pulled it up. It's like 90 votes. That is you can tell how populous county.
He wasn't really even a factor in the Iowa primary. So you can see where, he's
right.
It's a state he's just naturally going to struggle in, even among Democrats.
Yeah. And I'm going to try to zoom out a little bit here so people can see this a little bit better. But that southeastern part of the state right here, folks, how well can they see that, Tim? I'm not really looking. But
a little bit, but it's a little blurry. You'd have to blow it up.
Let me blow this up. Let me get that out of there.
Times.
Yeah, I'm going to get that thing out of there. This way, it'll come. It takes a little bit of time, guys. Yeah, I went the wrong way first, but it will come back. It just takes a little bit of time because it's a database of, millions and millions of people. So it does take a little while. Here we go. Getting a little closer now. I want them to see the southeastern part of the state. I just got to make sure I don't roll with the mouse. But this area all right here was Obama country. This was, and you can see where these pockets of Democrats are because these are the more populous areas. Obviously, Polk County, Lynn County. This is where Bernie Sanders won the caucus right here. So against Pete Buttigieg.
Iowa City.
Yeah, I mean, you got Des
Iowa City,
Moines.
it's near the Quad Cities, right?
Yeah, and Des Moines. Yeah, right.
And Des
And then
Moines, yeah, in the middle of the
Dubuque.
state. Yeah.
This was a major miss for pollsters right here in 2020 in the Iowa caucuses for Democrats. This was a major miss. The Monmouth poll, several others said that Biden would carry this area right here. He wound up losing it badly. And then you had Pete Buttigieg. His even though he claimed victory on election night, he didn't win Iowa. He didn't win, not by any measure, whether it be the first or second round of voting or the actual SDEs, state delegate equivalents. In the end, when it all comes down to it, and that those numbers are completely tallied up, I think people will find that SDEs were allocated incorrectly. We actually did send some of our findings to the Sanders campaign because they were wrong. I mean, the first county we looked at, Tim, remember? The first county we looked at and the very first precinct in that county, we found an area where Bernie Sanders had won more of the first and second round in voting, yet he wasn't allocated a single state delegate equivalent. They actually, in the first one we looked at, they were actually allocated to Amy Klobuchar, and then a small amount was allocated to Pete Buttigieg. And he was nowhere. He wasn't given a single one, not even because they break those things, get broken down even to decimals. And he wasn't allocated a fraction of a state delegate equivalent in a precinct where he won. But again, the point we're making here, folks, is that this is where this area of the state right here is where Barack Obama won Iowa both times. That's how John Kerry kept it down. Okay. And with the exception of the counties that we went over, even some of them, by the way, 2 of them that we went over, those were actually Trump counties. But 14 points, that last one went to Barack Obama. And that was Scott County. And it only went for Clinton by 1.5 points. And you see the challenge, not just Biden, but any Democratic candidate would have undoing that against, I bet you if it was Mitt Romney, it would be a different story, Tim. But it's against Donald Trump. And that's the whole point here. And Donald Trump took 18 of these counties, 18 of them he flipped. So just in this area alone, folks, and that doesn't count the running up that he did out in Sioux and in the rest of them. It's 11:31. Time really moves when you're going through these states. I wish we had more time to go through some of these states, but I don't want to miss out on Iowa. I mean, on Ohio. And let me see. I mean, I could see if there's any average folks start to pay attention post-debate commit. Yeah, I think that, Mark agrees with you, Tim, that once average people start to pay attention after the conventions, whether they be virtual or not, once they start to pay attention to Biden himself. And I agree with that. I think Biden is being helped right now by this crisis in some respect because he's out of the eye. He's struggling to get attention. And actually, if I was the Biden, they're incompetent over at the Biden campaign. If it wasn't for the media, there wouldn't have been a single Democratic candidate would have stood a prayer against Donald Trump. All conditions in the electorate being equal, they need the media to help them. This guy's a train wreck, and his team is incompetent. They are incompetent. They don't really seem to understand what they're doing. They can't even hook up a scope. I mean, they can't even do a periscope. I mean, it's so bad. If it wasn't for the media helping them out, I think Biden would be probably down by 6 points, 5 points nationally right now. But in any event, it is 11:33, and I want to do Ohio when we come back. And guys, if you got questions, we can go over these more in another thing. Right now, I'm trying to show you just the basics, some of the more important counties that mattered the most, and how Donald Trump was able to flip these states, so you can understand what it would really take for a Democratic candidate to take back a state like Iowa, despite what the polling will show. Because you will see some very crazy polling out there. It's going to happen. Just get used to it. But now you just saw the real numbers, and you can look at the poll and you can say, is this realistic? How did this pollster get this likely voter model? Where did he come up with it, or she? And it'll give you some. I'm trying to give ammunition so to arm you. You can answer some of the questions that you send to me on Twitter all the time. You can answer these questions yourself, because we don't. And if you follow me, this is my major criticism of this industry. One, they refuse to evolve. And then two, they don't give news consumers in this era, an era of when, Tim, people now, every time a poll comes out, everybody wants to digest it. People are really involved. A lot of high interest in these things at a level that we haven't seen before. They owe it to the people to give them more information. It is not okay anymore to simply say, that's a proprietary likely voter model.
Right.
That's proprietary information.
Right.
Well, then you shouldn't be a public pollster. If you want to be a rock star who has a proprietary likely voter model that is like super to the moon, makes you superior to everybody else, then sell that crap to campaigns.
It's like the proprietary blend that some people that's listed on some of these herbal things that people sell either online or at the pharmacy.
Right.
People want to know what's really in it.
That's right. Take that snake oil to
we're not going to tell you what's in it, but trust us, it's good for you.
That's it. Trust us. Take that snake oil to the campaigns and make yourself some money. Do not take it to CNN or Fox News and try to pitch it as like, well, I'm just too trustworthy to question on this. I have a superior proprietary likely voter model, and you shouldn't question me on it. That's not going to fly anymore. I thought after 2016, people would realize it's not going to fly anymore, but apparently not, Tim.
Well, I think the height in people's, I think that the spike in people's interest into what really goes on with these polls is because is due to the fact that they've been so wrong.
That's right.
For the last 3 cycles.
I totally agree. I completely agree.
So people are starting to question, well, how can they be so wrong? How did they really come up with these numbers?
And when we ask people, do you trust political polling? It's so terrible. It's so terrible. That is far cry from the years of when this thing was basically dominated by Gallup. They were extremely accurate, with the exception, they had the screw up with Truman and Dewey, and we have a great thing on People's Pundit Daily. I'll link it under the YouTube area with the information about the show, and I'll put a couple of these articles that we spoke about up there, and because it's really, Gallup, with the exception of 2 elections, had an incredible pre-2012 track record. It was something else. It was really something else. But now, as to repeat the phrase a lot of people have heard me say before, there are too many polls and not enough pollsters. Too many polls and not enough pollsters. Everybody thinks they can do this. And then they become a public pollster with a small to zero track record, and they're thrown into an average. It's taken as gospel, like the COVID-19 models have been taken as gospel when it should be taken with a grain. It used to be we had Gallup and we had some trusted organizations that would poll for media outlets. Things are a lot different now. It's 11:37. Wow, let me get through this. But to wrap that point up is that it's very different industry than it used to be. And so now, like Tim said, people are paying attention. They happen to start paying attention at a really bad time. Sadly, that's just a reality. They happen to pay attention at a really bad time. And we're going to have to do something different if we want to earn their trust back. So that's why we're doing these segments, though. So when these polls come out, you can understand, well, wait a minute, how could this be? Rich just showed me the voter file, right? Rich just showed me the voter file. So this pollster is assuming a quarter of the electorate in Clark County is not going to show up, apparently. And you'll know that. You'll know that that's what it would take for these polls, some of these polls to be right. Let's do the spiel here, Tim, and then you do the market update, and we'll run over Southeast Ohio, okay? All right, so it is 11:38. Whoa, blows fine. Eastern Standard Time. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. You can follow me right there at Peoples_Pundit on Twitter. And I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. Follow him on Twitter at TJAnderson1. And Tim's going to bring us a market update. But before he does, if you're watching on YouTube, We appreciate those likes and subscribe to the channel. All of those metrics matter. If you're still on Periscope, give us the hearts and follow whichever account it's airing on. Mine and PPD's. Follow one, follow both. And the ultimate way that you can support the show is by subscribing to PPD. It's ppdnews.us /subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. All right, I'm going to throw it and kick it to Tim. I'll be right back, and then we will look at Ohio together.
So the market's really got three things going on in it today. The Dow and the S&P are up about 1.5%, maybe a little bit more, holding most of the gains they've had throughout the day. They've ranged from up 1 to up 2%. Right now, the Dow and the S&P up about 1.5%. The Russell 2000 is wildly overperforming, up 3.5%. The NASDAQ is trailing, up only about 0.5%. Now, clearly, the NASDAQ has had the smallest of the declines from the February highs. For it to be trailing the bounce back from the lows really kind of makes sense. It's a little bit of a mean reversion. And the NASDAQ, the Russell 2000, to be overperforming significantly today, I think is being helped quite a bit by part of what the Fed rolled out this morning. And in all of their new initiatives, they are backing, this is the Fed backing 4-year loans made through the banks to companies with up to 10,000 employees and with $2.5 billion dollars of revenue per year or less. That is almost textbook the Russell 2000. The Russell 2000. Those, they can have deferred payments of up to a year, and this is being called the Main Street Lending Program, not to be confused with the Small Business Lending Program, which is probably for even smaller companies than that. Many small and local private companies that was rolled out by Treasury last Friday. There might still be a couple of kinks in that, but my view about that program is there is so much on the line that and it was rolled out so quickly that they are going to iron out the wrinkles in it, because there's just way too much on the line for that not to succeed. Now, where oil is up about 3%, there is a 10 million barrel oil production cut agreed to by the OPEC plus countries. That involves 2 million barrels a day from Russia, 4 million barrels a day from Saudi Arabia, and the rest of it from the other OPEC countries in aggregate. So we're 4.5 hours from 4.5 hours from the close, going into a 3-day weekend. It'll be very interesting to see how the market holds these gains during the remainder of the day.
What should we be looking for, Tim, in the last 2 hours of trading today? So, I'm a go-to. I like looking at the Russell. I like looking at the Dow. People really don't know what stocks are indexed on some of them. A lot of people don't, So what should we be looking at in the last final 2 hours to see whether or not we're going to see some profit taking, which could give up some of these gains?
Well, I think you're seeing a little bit of profit taking in some of the
right now.
In some of the technology, in some of the big technology stocks, maybe some of the FANG stocks, certainly companies that have always had big supply chains coming from China. As the talk gathers some momentum about bringing those supply chains back here to the United States, or maybe to other more friendly countries, that's going to be a big expense for a lot of those companies. So, maybe you're talking a lot of the clothing manufacturers, maybe you're talking a lot of the technology companies. Apple is certainly, the biggest name, probably with the biggest operations over there that comes to mind. And I would just pay attention to maybe the relative strength in the last 4 hours going into the end of the day, particularly going into a 3-day weekend.
And Apple too, when it comes to reopening the economy, that's one of the companies to watch. We even saw that with China, by the way. They were one of the first ones to make that move back in, reopen their plants, their buildings, right? So let's get over to Ohio now, Tim, and I will try to look at these questions as they roll in, guys. I really, we're down now to about 15 minutes of the whole show, and we have the outgoing thing to do. So realistically, I'm thinking we got 10 minutes or so. I'll try to answer if you guys got questions. I see them posting on YouTube, on Scope. If you have, Luis, he says New Mexico is a unicorn. He said before. I totally agree. That's my point. I totally agree. It would be an unusual seed change. It would be comparable. Trump would have to make inroads with not only independents but Democratic voters, Latino voters specifically, and he would have to make the kind of inroads that Biden has to make, which was my original point, that Biden has to make in a state like Iowa. Among white working class in those 18 counties we just that I just showed you and highlighted. We got into 3, but he would have to make inroads like that. That's a comparable situation. So it's a unicorn. It's a unicorn. At least it is now anyway. So okay, let me bring in the screen again, Tim, and let's take a look at Ohio. Okay. And let's see. I don't know if I should give us a little peek there. Can see if you guys can see that. I'll zoom in so you can still see Tim and I. But here we are. So this is going to be first. Let's cast a really wide net. All right. And I did. I went in here into demographics, and basically what I did is the only thing. This is our default for people who have been watching the last couple of days. The default is we exclude dead people. And I know the comments have been funny. Yeah, well, that's where you're going wrong, Rich. You're excluding dead people, and Democrats, that's part of their base. Look, this is the industry standard way of doing it. You can't add the dead, and then change of address flags, which are people who are recent movers. So if they have left the state and moved to Florida or Texas or something like that, they are no longer eligible to vote in those states, so they have to be removed. And the only justifiable thing to do here is to remove them. And as far as a party, now Ohio is a state where the model will both look at the voter registration and infer the voter registration. So we have all 4 categories for partisans in Ohio. If you thought Iowa was surprising before, even though it looks close without the probability to vote indicator being in there. If you think Iowa is surprising, and Wisconsin the other day with almost a 5-point advantage Republican on the base advantage for Republicans was surprising. Let's take a look at Iowa. Again, party, gender, household income. Ohio. Yes. Thanks, Tim. Party, gender, household income, marital status, ethnicity, education, religion. Let's do it. And actually, I got to get into the habit while it's running. I got to get into the habit of showing people the other things as well, Tim, because religion is another great indicator to tell you how people could vote, their preference. It's really right up there with some of the other ones. But anyway, look at this. Okay. And here's why this is Trump won this state, by the way. Democrats are 26.3%. All right. And their actual known is very small. The actual Republicans known is it's 2%, but still very small. It gives Republicans about a little bit bigger of an edge than it does in Iowa, but unknowns are a huge portion of the electorate. There is actually a small third party contingency here, but again, this is why it used to be Ohio was the quintessential battleground state, and it is still very important for Republicans. Before we move on to some of the other areas, I want to explain why Ohio was actually one of the states where we underestimated Donald Trump's margin, like others did, quite a bit, in fact. So the highest we ever had him in Ohio in 2016 was 5 points. And then our final was only 3 points.
He won the state by 9 points. And when we get into geography, I'm going to explain why that happened. Okay. Here again, we have a large independent electorate that tends to favor the Republican candidate. Lately, this is a state that is a great example of the Republican Party benefiting more from Donald Trump than Donald Trump has benefited from the Republican Party. There are independents here who never, and I mean never, would vote for a Republican before the era of Donald Trump. They didn't like them. They were viewed as, what's the word I'm looking for? The big business party, Tim. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, it would be very interesting to go back and see when the last time a Republican won that state by 9 percentage points in a presidential election was.
I'll look at Reagan. I'm gonna say I think it was Reagan.
I would imagine Reagan did. I doubt that. I don't even know if Bush 41 won it by 9 points, even though his electoral margin was something that probably Trump can't match this time.
Oh, it was in the 400s.
Yeah, it was low 400s.
Yeah. He was actually one of the biggest. He's got the privileged distinction of being one incumbent president to win an election by one of the largest margins and then lose re-election. So he won one of the largest electoral vote margins in history for a president who lost re-election.
Right.
And so the reason here, and again, Rob Portman, very popular in this state.
I think he won by 17 points, didn't he? The same in 16.
Yeah, he takes about here. He's going to take about 3%, 4% out of this. Rob Portman out of the Democrats base, and then he's just overwhelmingly popular across the board with Republicans and independents. So Rob Portman does get a vote that Donald Trump doesn't get, but Rob Portman also gets a vote that is only because of Donald Trump. All right. They would never have been Republicans, or they would never cast a vote for Republicans if it wasn't for Donald Trump. And I'm going to show you where that happens actually in a second. Okay. But let's go down a little bit more. And I would say again, Tim, we will start polling Ohio soon. Josh Mandel would have beaten Sherrod Brown. I am like 99.5% sure of that. We were polling that race until he dropped out and Racine took over. And then he had no chance. We pulled it one time and we stopped public funding for the poll because he had no chance. I mean, structurally, we can look at some of these margins and we can say we don't have to poll it anymore. We know structurally he is not meeting marks with certain groups, not even the minimum standard to be competitive. So we're moving on. Sherrod Brown wins, folks, because, and he had the narrowest victory this time around. He was the only peak of light in 2018 for Democrats. They got a nice swing in the House, and Republicans stopped them at every point in the state of Ohio. They got nothing out of the state of Ohio except they held a Senate seat. That's it. They didn't even win the gubernatorial race, which all the polls showed. Mike DeWine wasn't.
I don't think there was one poll showing DeWine winning that race.
You have to go back to July before the election, and there was a single poll that showed it basically competitive. I believe it was NBC Marist, and then their newer polling showed that DeWine would lose. And the reason why Sherrod Brown could hang on, and I'll show you this geography. We're getting close. I'm going to run through this here. But he wins a little bit of the Republican vote, and he does well among independents. And then he holds his margin. Real quick before we move on to the actual map, this is always fun. There's usually a large number of unknown with religion in the voter file. That's just in the models. That's just the way it is. People are very tight with that knowledge. But Protestants, almost 60% of the electorate. The Protestant religion is the strongest religion for the Republican Party. So Catholics, a nice chunk of the vote, 16%. Ohio is one area in the country where Donald Trump does better with Catholics. That's a swing vote because there are Hispanics in the state, in the Catholic religion, and that helps the Democratic Party. But in the state of Ohio, we're looking at 2% are actually Hispanic. So we're not looking at a lot at all. It's still an 82+% white vote. Okay. So let's map this puppy out. And then let me show you where that comes from. All right. And then you'll get, it's still loading up. Give it a second. But the reason why we underpolled Donald Trump's estimate, we underestimated Donald Trump's vote share in Ohio, is that southeastern region, Tim. That's why we didn't really believe the numbers, which were telling us that Donald Trump was going to kill it down here in Athens, in and around Athens. And I just
that's historically a very, very economically depressed area that is also very involved in the oil fracking, shale, and some coal business.
And he also, too, this area around Franklin used to be, it's almost, if you go back to George W. Bush's
That's
victory,
Columbus suburbs.
Yep. If you go back to George W. Bush's lousy 2-point victory in the state of Ohio, but a win is a win, right? If you go back to it, you'll find that it came from these burbs over here. Okay.
Yep.
They were the fastest growing exurbs in the states back then, too, was in and around Franklin County. All right. Now you're seeing actually Democrats are doing much better in Franklin and in the metro burbs outside of Franklin. And then the vast majority too, you have the southwestern part of the state. The problem is that, Republicans just completely have them boxed in here. And then even in Toledo, this blew up here. Outside of Toledo, the burbs that, are good, right picking grounds for Democrats are actually small compared to some of the other areas in the state. So, Republicans hold them down here. They hold them down here. They boxed them in Franklin. And this is where the Democrats' salvation is in this state.
Sure.
It hasn't been paying off. It just hasn't been enough. It just hasn't been enough. And I'm going to show you why. Let's see real quick if I can pull this up. Let's hide Republicans and Democrats. Okay. Let's hide them out. And let's just look at those others. Look at where they are. Look at where they are. Look at how uniform that coloring is here. That tells you it's a concentrated area. Hamilton, same thing. Used to be a very solid stronghold in and around this area for Democrats. Even in Franklin, the reason why their margins haven't been as big as some of those comparable areas in other states around the country, or what's a good example, Tim? Oakland, how they've made inroads in Oakland County in Michigan. That's a good example. Because you have such, a large 4 in 10, 44, it changes month to month, but it's a large, they are the single biggest voting block, according to their actual voting behavior in this model. So if you cannot make inroads with them or you lose them, which they are losing them now and they will lose them. If there was a 13-point national mood in 2018 and Ohio still bucked that national trend, then that goes to show you the hill that a Democratic presidential candidate has to climb if they want to take back Ohio from Donald Trump. And again, Trump would need to lose this vote by a significant amount because the Republican base is larger. So he would have to lose it by not just, a few points. Biden would have to really clobber him among this group, bigger than Democrats won in 2018. And the point I'm trying to make is, with 3 minutes left in the show, good luck with that. If you're running Joe Biden's campaign, you're far better off trying to head off his path in other Midwest areas such as Wisconsin, such as Michigan and Pennsylvania. As we went over earlier in the week, I'm not bullish on Biden's chances in Wisconsin, despite the Marquette University poll. And if you watched, you know why. But we got 2 minutes left here, folks. I'll leave you with that.
And as much as the fact that he's from the Scranton area in Pennsylvania, the west side of the west half of the state is just going to be brutal for him.
Yeah, and you're going to have to take back, not just take it back, like Luzerne County, how much that tightened in 2016. Again, another Barack Obama loving area. White working class, Obama did better among them than the exit polls ever gave him credit for. And
that was one of the counties that Selena Zito featured in her book.
It's a big. She does brilliant work for
She's
people who have
tremendous.
not
Yeah.
seen. What was it called? The Rust Belt Revolution or something
I
like
think
that?
it was. I can't remember exactly.
You know what? If we were home, I'd have been able to grab it. I had it.
Yeah,
It's one of the
yeah.
books I got. It's a great book, and a lot of key points. Does different than what I do, which is based in numbers. She interviews, and it's really fantastic, really great work. But okay, it's 11:59 here. I'm going to give us our little outro. What a quick show. That really went by. I guess I'm going to have to allocate more time to some of these voter files. There's so much I'd like to show people, but I hope they got an idea today, Tim, about Iowa and Ohio and how heavy of a lift it will be for a Democrat to take those states back. They are much better positioned to take back other states than that. If I did miss some of your questions, we'll do a better job, on getting, we'll do a better job in getting them back, we were talking about the eastern side of the state, Wyatt. I don't know where you were coming in with that. He says we were wrong with the western side. Well, it's a good thing we were talking about the eastern side of the state. That was the featured part of the of the show, of the whole segment. But 11:59. So check us back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and YouTube, Periscope, Facebook Live. If you had problems with Periscope, I get it. Just go to YouTube, I guess, from now on. But we'll do our best to answer questions tomorrow that we might have missed today. Again, you watched Inside. Thanks for watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. You can follow me over here, right here, at Peoples_Pundit on Twitter. And I was joined, as always, by Tim the Source Anderson. Tim can be followed at TJ Anderson1 on Twitter. Give us the likes, give us the hearts before you go, folks. Like us on Facebook. And subscribe to us on YouTube. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to subscribe to PPD. Go to ppdnews.us/subscribe. A lot of fun again today, guys. All the best. We'll see you back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.